It's not a gang, though. I don't know if anybody would kill anybody or not.
I don't want to find out. I'm terrified now. This is the most scared I've been on one of these episodes.
What's up, friends, dudes, awoken dudes? Thanks for being here. Today, I am releasing a conversation I had with my friend Thomas Neal. Thomas and I sat down to talk before he headed out west to go and join a motorcycle gang, which he later corrected me and told me that it was a motorcycle club. But I'd been talking to these guys, these awoken dudes, for this project, and Thomas and I had briefly touched on having him on the podcast. I didn't know when it would happen. And then one day he texted me and said, "I'm leaving town. I quit my job. Can we talk tomorrow?" I said, "Okay." The next day he pulled up into my driveway in his van that he had converted over to an RV. It's what he's now living in. It's what he drove out west with motorcycle in tow to go and join the motorcycle club. This conversation is one of my favorite kinds of conversations. We very quickly skip past the small talk and dive straight into what does it mean to be alive? What is your ego? How do you identify it? How do you kill it? What is success? How do you define it for yourself? And how do you define success for yourself and then also be fulfilled? And how do you be an agent of change for the people around you? I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I truly enjoyed having it. And if you're here and you like what we've been doing so far, or at any point you feel so inclined during the video, hit the like button. Actually, do it now, please, because that helps out a lot. This channel is in its infancy. This podcast is in its infancy, but it's so rewarding and enriching for me. I can't imagine that it won't help somebody else. And speaking of, please, if you have any questions, start talking in the comments. Let's build a community here. There are some places online where guys can talk about being vulnerable, but in my opinion, there's not enough. So that's why I'm here. And without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Neal.
So Thomas Neal, your home is in my driveway.
Yeah, it took me about 20 seconds to get here from home.
Yeah. Oh man, we've stayed in touch off and on through social media. Kindred spirits. I don't remember how we first connected.
Your guess is as good as mine, to be honest with you. I think you started following me when I was going through the crap, and then we just hit it off at some point. I don't really remember.
Yeah, I'll get into the crap for a second, but I want to talk about like what's happening in a contemporary sense in your life. It's super exciting. You're joining you've joined a motorcycle gang. It seems like, right?
Yeah. No, I
the Hells Angels. I'm joking.
I call them clubs.
That's not fair. If you're listening and you're in the club, please don't come and find me. Don't look at Thomas's tracking.
It's not a gang, though. I don't know if anybody would kill anybody or not.
I don't want to find out. I'm terrified now. This is the most scared I've been on one of these episodes.
No, we're just a bunch of dudes that freaking live life, man. And motorcycles is sort of the way that we express that. So go fast, don't die. Some of my buddies, I actually met them for real in life about a year ago, and I just was like, these are great people. These are people I want to spend more time with. So that's kind of where that started. I was already following them and was getting to know Brady and those guys, especially Brady, pretty well beforehand. So
for some context, and I want to know too. I started following this group of bikers, this bike club, because of you.
It's actually a brand.
Okay, a brand. All right. So you started following a brand through Instagram. Mm-hmm. Brady is one of the faces of the brand, or is it the face?
One of the owners too. So when I was going through the divorce, the crap that we were just talking about, when I was going through the divorce, I actually had started following him around then. I don't know if it was before or after, but during that time, when I was still sort of sorting that whole thing out, and I was really just gravitated towards his personality, and because of that, I don't know if it was because of Go Fast or because of him. I don't know which one I followed first, but either way, they're kind of one and the same in some ways. Obviously, a lot of his ethos is what bleeds into the brand. So, I was talking to them a lot, especially him around that time, and just kind of I felt a connection with that guy, and their brand is very much just about living life, chasing your fears, living life,
So I want to interject real quick, just for context for myself and anyone that's listening. You reached out to Brady? You cold DM'd him?
Well, it was more of like, so he's a personable guy. He's like I am on social media. He just like talks about things and like invites people to respond.
Okay.
So like he'd talk about stuff and I'd usually respond or whatever. And then at one point, you know, we got into a little bit deeper conversations, and so.
Awesome. That has changed my life in a lot of ways. Reaching out to people on Instagram, social media, that's exactly how we know each other.
Yeah.
And I hate it so much too.
Why?
I quit social media. I was just telling you about that before we started this, and I didn't quit it, but I took it off of my phone, and for 2 weeks I don't think I used it. And I used to be a chain smoker, and I quit smoking, and I don't know if it's fair to say that they felt the same, draw.
I can understand that.
I was checking too much, and I've been in this process of like, I'm always building things, but I just started growing a business that makes some money. So I think maybe that was playing into the anxiety, like looking to see what my competitors were doing, looking to see if someone like could benefit from me.
Yeah.
And nonetheless, I checked all day, every day, and it was making me feel bad. And I feel happier now without it.
Right.
But I also have this, it's like a catch-22. Like I know you exclusively from social media.
Right.
A client that I just got that gave me cash money actually came from social. I wouldn't know him from social media.
Right.
You were joining the Spike Club, not gang, because of social media exclusively.
Yeah.
So what the fuck is that balance? And I don't know, maybe it'll be something I'd chase my entire life.
Right. Well, and I think that's personal. That's got to be personal, obviously.
Yeah.
But I know for me, it's sort of where I express myself. It's where I find I do spend probably more time on it than I probably should. But at the end of the day, I also don't have a family, and I don't have I'm just living life and I'm sharing it. So there's less need for that balance for me.
Yeah, and you're using it for what I don't know what you're using it for all the time, but you have clearly used it for what it is intended to do,
Right.
to make connections, to be social.
Yep.
You know, it's what you're doing is much more than a highlight reel, even though I would imagine your highlight reel is about to take a step up.
Yep.
That's so crazy. So I think there is some value in that for anybody that I know that would listen to something like this, that, you know, just reach out to people. You know, don't fake it. Like you were going through stuff, you liked someone's personality.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you imagined or fantasized or could see yourself in the position you're in now where you're going to go. And you've met these people, and I don't know if you're going to work with them or not, but
we've talked about possibly. I'm mostly at this point. I'm just I say that I'm just going to live life with those guys, and if they offer me the job a job, then cool. If not, then I've got enough saved up to get through the summer without a job. So I don't and really what it comes down to is honestly I didn't visualize anything like that. It was more of just I play everything fast and loose. I live life, and it was more of like I said, it was super spontaneous. So when I did meet them face to face, I took a trip down to Tennessee to meet them because they were going to be there, and we hung out for the weekend. And I was just like, these are my people. These are they're freaking awesome. And I decided that I was going to I needed to figure out a way to get out of Indiana, which I've tried to do many times. Yeah. I've tried to do so many times, but I was I need to figure out how to live a life that allows me to go live life like they do. Mm-hmm. And so I got back and literally a couple days later sold that motorcycle that I had, bought the van, and started building. And I was like, I'm just going to freaking do this thing.
Yeah. Are you full-time in the van right now?
Yeah, I've been living in it since December, just staying at work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this Thursday is my last day.
So you're working from home, kind of. That's
Pretty much.
2020 style, right?
Yeah. I just walk to work every morning.
It's funny. I didn't research a ton for this because I've been knowing you I've been following you for a while. I've been knowing you. That's a weird thing to say. I've been knowing you, brother. No,
words, man.
I've been watching your story develop, and I've been invested in it. But this also was a very spontaneous meeting because, like you said, fast and loose, and you're like,
I'm about to leave.
I'm going. But I was just thinking about being in your situation and what would I want to know? What would someone want to hear if they're in a van or thinking about getting a van? You kind of touched base on the safety net. Mm-hmm. How far out do you have, if you don't mind me asking?
Maybe the summer, maybe not. I don't know. I haven't lived on the road, so I don't really know what it's gonna cost me every month. But if I scale everything back well enough, I think I can get through the summer. But honestly, this is probably the first time that I've had a safety net when I've jumped out of the metaphorical boat.
Yeah.
You know, because
Yeah,
I've done
never
it
did.
many times in my life, and I've just sold everything and not really had anything in savings and just went wherever I was going.
Yeah.
Whether that be the times I've done like crazy ministry things, or when I tried to move to California, or when I was gonna move to St. Louis, or when I moved across the world to Australia with my ex-wife. Like, we didn't have hardly anything. We were relying on.
Yeah.
That one was relying on factors that we probably shouldn't have been relying on. But regardless, it was just
So
like,
it was your wife at the time. You moved to Australia on a whim.
sort of a whim. It was pretty quick. It was more of like, I felt like, for her sake, she needed to be there, and so we did what we had to get there, and what we had to do was rely on her family, and they kind of screwed us. So, and then we came back, and that's
You had
when-
She had family there.
Well, she grew up there. She was a dual citizen.
Oh, okay.
So, but then we came back, and that's when everything fell apart. Like, I don't really want to get into it just because I don't want to smear, but like,
Yeah.
she was like, I'm going to leave. And I found out later that it was for somebody else. So,
Okay.
I ended up fighting for the marriage for 6 months before she finally filed, which was an interesting time. But,
Yeah. That's why I reached out to you initially, and I didn't know if you'd want to talk about it because you don't talk about it now.
Yeah.
But
it's been more like I'm sort of figuring out how to talk about those things now.
Yeah.
Now that I'm not going through them and without, because I did feel like to some degree I was kind of creating an identity around being divorced, and I started to realize that might be the case, and then I was holding on to that as like a thing that is me, and I was like, no, I don't want that.
Yeah.
So I'm getting to a point where I'm like, okay, I can talk about it from like the experiential point, and not feeling like it's my identity anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. It is a part of you to have those traumas and the tragedy. And I, from just living life, have had things happen, whether they've been amazing things or not so great things, like,
Right.
a divorce or custody battles with my child. And I think it's completely natural to want to lean into that identity, sometimes exclusively.
Right.
And this is like anecdotal, but Jordan Peterson, are you familiar with Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson?
I don't think so.
Okay, he's a psychologist, and he has a program where you can identify your past self, present self, and future self, and it's like ways to figure out what kind of personality you have
Okay.
to advance in life or to put yourself in a better position. It's like $30. It's a great offer. But for the past self, they specifically ask that you have at least not an hour. That's crazy. It's fucking social media brain. You have to have like at least a year between you and the tragedy
Right.
that you're going to uncover because you don't want to like re-traumatize yourself.
Interesting. See, I've spent a lot of time lately, more through like the eyes of the Enneagram and sort of like my faith basis, but I've spent a lot of time like thinking back through childhood, like why am I the way I am?
Yeah.
And I've been going back through like childhood things, and I'm like, this is crazy. Which it's really beneficial, like,
Yeah.
but like I used to think back and be like, oh, there's nothing, like why, like none of that really mattered. Now I'm starting to realize why some of it mattered. So, like more of just like how I related to family and friends and things.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to realize like, oh, like regardless of whether or not anything that like was perceived was actual or just perceived, regardless, it was perceived, and therefore I created myself and my defenses around those perceptions. And so I've been going through those perceptions.
Yeah. Have you been doing that with like a coach or a therapist or
I just spend time
psychedelics, meditation?
no, nothing like that. I just spend a lot of time in my own head. I've always tried to be really self-aware.
Yeah.
And I've done the therapy thing. Like after the divorce, I went to therapy, and it didn't feel right. Like,
Did you try? And I'm just merely curious. I'm wondering if you tried different therapists.
I didn't.
Okay.
But at the time too, it was like I didn't feel like paying for it.
Dude, for sure. That's for me right now. I'm like, I want to talk to a therapist, but I don't necessarily like the therapist I've talked to because of like personal stuff. And then I'm like, do I even want to pay for a therapist?
Right.
And I'm like, well, they're going to tell me I have to work on it on my own anyway.
Right. Well, for me, it was less that and more the fact that so my personality type, I can go in and I can talk to somebody and I can if I don't have rapport with him, if there's not consequence to my actions relationally with the person, then I can always compartmentalize. So it's actually, I found it better for me to go to like friends. I have a friend who, she's a therapist, but she doesn't like therapy me. But like I can actually go to her and I can talk through things. And because there's actual like relational context, if I were to like come out and lie, which I have zero desire to lie, but like if I were to like say something that wasn't completely false, or if like I was like, oh no, I'm fine, and I wasn't, then A, like she knows me well enough that she can call me on it, and B, because I don't know if it's just because I have a context of like honor or whatever, like a code of honor, I don't know, but like because of the way that I hold myself accountable when it comes to those contexts, I'm like, no, I absolutely refuse to hide these things or lie or like not. Whereas with a therapist, I could be like, well, it doesn't matter. Like I could be honest with that person, but when I walk out, I'm like, they're not going to be able to hold me to it.
Yeah.
I'm just paying them to counsel me. They're not going to hold me to it. I'm going to be able to compartmentalize it away. If that makes sense.
I think I see what you're saying. I agree with you about accountability being hugely, I think, almost necessary.
Right.
And you don't necessarily have that with a therapist. You can like rehearse what you're going to say and go into it. The one benefit I've found from therapy, or at least conceptually for me with therapy, is that they're unbiased. They don't know you.
Right.
That their only real motive is to help you or to make money.
Oh, yeah.
For me, I know that's a thing, and Alexis and I go back and forth about her therapist. Her and I have the same therapist. She's had the therapist for years before me. She had it with her last husband and all this.
Yeah.
So for me, I have this whole, like, the logic is they don't play the Super Bowl on home turf ever, except for this year with Tom Brady. But generally, they don't do that, so there's not a home field advantage.
Right.
And I was like, I'm going into this home field advantage kind of situation. And then her therapist is, like, really insistent upon seeing me. I'm like, of course you are. For $85 an hour, I would be very insistent upon seeing every member in the house individually as well.
Yeah.
So I can't get over that part. And I think if I had a therapist that was completely disconnected from everybody I know, I also, for me with therapy, having a therapist that knows Alexis and my family, I feel like I have to like hold back, and you're not supposed to do that in therapy.
Right.
So nonetheless, I got on a tangent.
No, yeah,
But
you're good.
I see what you're saying about
Well, and
being
I'm not
able to
gonna-
like.
Sorry.
No. I see what you're saying about feeling like you won't have to be your authentic self. I'm curious if you think.
I wouldn't say it's that. It's more
Okay.
of like, so if I said, for me, I'm willing to be very vulnerable and like open about everything.
Yeah.
Except emotional context in the current state. I'm only, and maybe this is like the type of personality I have, but like the only people I'm willing to be open about like my like depth of emotion is people that have earned that right in my opinion. And really what it comes down to is honestly I didn't visualize any kind of anything like that. It was more of just like I play everything fast and loose, like I live life, and it was more of like I said, it was super spontaneous.
Yeah.
So when I did meet them face to face, well, I don't want to talk about it, then they respect it, but it's usually like, hey, I see through you, and I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah. You wear your emotions on your sleeve.
Oh yeah. Well, it's only like I do to some degree. It's super. I feel super like it's hard to contextualize it because I feel like I'm super open with just about everybody about a lot of things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like emotional, like if I'm going through trauma, like if I were going through trauma right now, I probably wouldn't open up to hardly anybody except for just a couple people about that thing while I'm going through it.
Yeah. I think that's smart though. Honestly, what I've learned from my relationship with Alexis, and it's the best relationship I've ever had with another human being, let alone a female counterpart. But I keep my cards a lot closer. But then I also, from doing that, I start to realize like it doesn't really matter. Like I can compartmentalize friends, and we have this relationship for that thing. And I struggle with, do I want to vent to this person? Because is venting complaining? And when does venting turn into complaining? And if you're able to have your emotions, and people can tell you're perturbed or angry or
Right.
you want to rip someone's head off, but you're not. Good for you for
Right.
being strong. And in my life coaching session, like I was just talking to you about, the mindset guy kept like talking about being like a mountain, like having mountain energy, and that's okay to be a man and to hold
Right.
in your feelings. You can also be vulnerable, but you don't have to like talk about everything you're going through every second.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's a time to turn it on, time to turn it off. for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. There's people that don't ever turn it off, and I don't like to be around those people. I also don't like to be about people that never like.
The floodgates are always open.
Yeah. I also don't like to be around people that don't ever talk about anything. It's awkward. Unless you're taking a vow of silence, then that's fine. But people that are completely closed off emotionally, I think there's some kind of like they're shielding their ego.
For sure. It's more of just like a depth thing. It's like I'll go a certain depth with literally everybody, and it's probably deeper than most people usually do.
Yeah.
But then there's like a layer of depth where I'm like, even with like a therapist or something, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, you haven't earned this. And even if I did spend a year with them, I'd be like, well, I'm still paying you. Like in my mind, I'm like, you still haven't earned this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I wonder what a therapist would say about that. Because
probably a lot.
Because I hear what you're saying, and I'm like that too. I don't want to open up with Alexis's therapist all the way because I'm like, what is she going to think about Alexis and I? And then I'm like, you know what? She's got to think that this is a lot of fun watching the tangled webs we weave. I'm like, there's no way a human can completely detach from that and everything else. Like, therapists are humans at the end of the day too.
Right. But I think another thing that helps though too is the fact that I choose to be as self-aware as possible, and I'm willing to call myself out on my own bullshit most of the time.
Yeah, I think, Thomas, if you completely opened up to a therapist and you went in and you're like, take off the brakes, take off the governor or whatever the thing is that makes the engine not go over a certain mileage, right? I should know the name of it for the analogy. But you remove the governor and pedal to the metal. You just say what's on your mind. You go as vulnerable as possible. They can give you a map.
I can say everything to anybody. That doesn't mean that. Like, and I could open up to them and be like, hey, this is what I'm going through, or this is what I'm doing, or this is how my thought process is. And they're going to be like, okay, well, like, what do you think about that, whatever? And I'm just going to be like, well, at the moment, I don't care. Because I know myself well enough to know that sometimes I can just emotionally detach, and I can be like, well, you're right, and I know, but because there's no consequence to me saying, like, for instance, say I was like, I'm just out, and this is completely hypothetical because I would never, but I'd be like, oh, I'm just, on the weekends, I'm getting in my feels and I'm going out and doing hookers and blow kind of thing,
Yeah.
And they'd be like, well, do you think that's best for you? I'd be like, no. But if I was like to say do something like that and then like admit it to somebody that actually has relational context in my life, it'd be like, ah, shit, they're gonna they know.
Yeah.
And like now I actually feel the depth of how stupid that is.
Yeah.
Whereas with a therapist, it's like, oh, I can open up, I can say whatever. You can't tell anybody, and I'm not going to see you after this appointment till our next appointment. So what does it matter in my mind?
Yeah.
That's just in my mind
because.
Yes, to some degree it does matter, but at the same time I can explain it away I can explain anything away in my head, and sometimes that's super dangerous.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people suffer from that complex. It also sounds like you are willing and eager, rather excited to use that cloak of shame as a motivation for your decisions. And usually people don't like shame, but you're like, I need it.
It's funny. I mean, I'm probably cussing a little more than I usually would, or I should. But
it's all
like
good.
At the gym, I'm the type of guy that like if I miss a lift, like in the mirrors in front of me, I'm literally like, "Come on, motherfucker, you got this. Like, quit being a little bitch." And I'll just like tell myself that, and that's like what drives me. Is I'm just like, all right, I got it. I know I can do it.
Yeah.
Quit. Like, get after it.
Yeah, I do that too. I call myself a little bitch on runs sometimes, or I call myself the F word.
Don't do it.
Yeah,
you can do it. Damn it. Don't you give up.
Yeah. But what motivates me the most, to be completely honest, and this is only because I have a family and kids, but I think about someone like trying to like hurt Alexis or hurt Olivia and Malachi, and then I'm like, ah, because like I wouldn't stop then.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But nothing like real life trauma to like actually like allow the adrenaline to kick in. You can only simulate it so much.
No, I spend a lot of time trying to dig into myself and figure out the whys behind why I am, because I do want to be a better person, and I've spent a lot of time I know I post a lot about the Enneagram, and that's been my tool, my primary tool over the last few years of like being a better person is through the context of that. So,
but know thyself is that a Christian saying?
Maybe. I mean, I feel like it's something that like Christians would say, but I don't think that's exclusive to Christianity.
Right. I don't think a lot of things that most religions say are exclusive to that one religion. They just kind of like, if you look into more than one, you're going to go to hell. But beyond that, there's a lot of similarities because these rules kind of honestly apply in a really hardcore fundamental manner. But knowing thyself is very important.
Oh yeah.
You keep saying, trying to figure out your whys, and to me, that shit was driving me crazy. And I'm in the marketing world a little bit, and Simon Sinek is a guy that wrote a book called Identify Your Why, and he talks about how every business should like identify their why, and that's
why you do what you do.
How you start. But you are an intellectual, in my opinion, and I like following your stories. You seem to be like embracing the stages in life that you're going through, and you're excited and eager, and almost like you're forcing yourself into these new seasons of life, and it's very inspiring. So for you, the why, you're welcome. For you, I would imagine the why could change day to day if you let it.
Well, the whys I'm talking about are more like, what are the things that I adapted to as a child that caused me to cope or whatever these days.
Yeah.
Those are the whys I was talking about, is like in that context. So
okay.
The why as far as where I'm at now, like, or why I'm doing what I'm doing now, it's more of like before the marriage and during the marriage, I spent a lot of time, like I took myself too seriously, and I took like my goals and aspirations too seriously, I think. And I thought that I needed to do certain things. And part of that was because like as a teenager, I was super alone. Like I homeschooled high school and I didn't have very many friends. And so like ambition is what kept me going. And so because of that, I got super serious about like being ambitious and getting after my dreams and aspirations. But like they never panned out the way I expected them to. But then the divorce is what like broke me. I've never been that broken until then. And it was during that time where I was like just laid bare, and I just couldn't sort of chase aspirations in the same way. Yeah. Like it was like, here I am, like I don't know what to do. So as I started to like rebuild and stuff, my why became less about being like successful in the traditional sense and more of like, now success to me is defined as doing more of what I love as often as possible. And then and by doing that, by proxy, what's probably going to happen is just by the consistency of doing it more, I'll probably become somewhat successful in a traditional sense, but it's no longer the goal. The goal is to do what I love more. Yeah. So.
It's interesting. So where I was kind of going with my ramble about the why is that for me it turned into who. And every morning when I wake up, I ask myself, who can I do something for? But what was kind of fucking me up is thinking about the who a lot of times is my family. Yeah. And then there's a who beyond that at this point, which kind of touches base on you talking about identifying with your tragedy. I've identified with tragedy, but I've also identified with like big things in life. I used to identify with being a vagabond home bum that lived in a van, which is awesome. I still in a lot of ways do, because that was the most revelatory experience that I've had. That was
you
like
still have the spirit in you.
Yeah. That was like my magnum opus. It was written and done by like the time I was 23. I'm like, damn it, I peaked too early. But I identified with being a parent for a long time too. And then like when I started doing stand-up, like all my jokes were about having kids, and I was like, I have to force myself to identify with something other than this. Right. And then with Alexis, when I was first in a relationship, and now I'm starting to do like more things on my own. But to me, the who is still better than the why. But the who allows you to stick your neck out there a little bit more and get completely fucking crushed. Because you just said, man, you've never been broken more than going through that with your wife. You talked about the divorce one time on YouTube.
All right.
Right? Have you talked about it since then?
Not too much. I honestly don't spend enough time in YouTube, and I'm getting back into YouTube. As far as Instagram, I think I talked about it quite a bit in my stories for a little bit, and maybe a couple posts, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Is there, if you could go back to Thomas that was going through that, what's a couple things, or it can be one thing, or it could be nothing if you don't want to answer, but what's a couple things or one thing that you would say to Thomas that had just found out there's someone else and you're getting ready to go through the most hell you've ever gone through?
Mm.
Like, what's like a mental weapon you'd give yourself?
I don't know. I don't know that. I was in a place where I was just like, to some degree, I was like, what will happen will happen. I chose in that time to do whatever I could and to come out the other side with as much integrity as possible. And for me, when I said for better or for worse, I was like, well, this is the worst that could ever happen. So, but I said for better or worse, so I'm going to stick it out and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time too, there were a couple people that I was very close to that had gone through something similar and they survived it, and their marriage now is like beyond what it ever was.
Yeah.
So them sort of counseling me through it a little bit helped a ton too, because like seeing her persevere for him, and then the fact that they came out the other side and like the fire in her eyes about it, like really helped me.
You talking about your friends that went through and got together? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know that there's anything that I could give myself that would prepare me any better. Because at the end of the day, it was just like, I will say for anybody that is going through it or ever does go through it, I will say like the best thing that you can possibly do is feel the pain, don't cope.
Yeah.
Because, and that's in anything. That's not just that. Like, and that's what I chose to do. I was like, I'm going to feel this.
Yeah.
Because I want to be a better man at the end of this, whether I'm still married or not.
Yeah.
And now at this point, it's like, okay, for whoever I end up marrying down the line. So I don't know how to answer that question in a good way.
If that's honestly how you felt, then that is, to me, very profound, because there have been a lot of times in my life where I've gone through some real shit, or it's been stuff I brought on, and I can think back to about 100 different things that I've done wrong,
Right.
things I regret, mean things I've done. But now, where I'm at in my life, and that's kind of like I think the genesis of this like awoken dudes and all the stuff I'm doing now, and why you're here and why I've been talking to other men is,
Right.
I had the kind of role model for a long time. There's a dad that like was a narcissist and refused to take any ownership or have any
Right.
accountability, and deflected all the time and was a compulsive liar. So for me to come through the other side, like kind of like my ethos now has been to have as little regret as possible, especially with Alexis. Like at the end of our relationship, I want to look back and say exactly what you just did. So I don't know how you learned that so much longer ago. But that's awesome, dude.
There's a lot of context there. I think like the way I grew up in church culture and stuff like that. Like I was fortunate enough to grow up in a decent church culture.
That's good. I grew up in a the opposite.
Right. And I see that so much. Like I have a lot of quarrels with the current church as it stands, but we don't need to get into that so much. But just like the way I grew up, I think, and the fact that I don't know, there's a level of like excellence that I kind of in my early 20s is what sort of inspired me, is trying to be as excellent as possible. So that kind of pushed me towards being as good as I could be. But yeah, I think too the fact that like she was so broken and I was like as empathetic as possible through the whole thing.
Your wife at the time was so broken?
Yeah, I chose to like, I knew that like I loved her as much, like so much, and I guess I will bring it back to faith a little bit. To me, there was a little bit of like, okay, if I turn my back on my God as much as I do, and He still would love me, then like the one person I love the most would turn their back on me. How could I turn around and do the same? So there was some of that. There's a lot of things. There's so many things. I don't know. I don't know what it is that like gave me the wherewithal to live that way, but I did eventually cope. The thing that really helped the most though was that I like lasted as long as I did without coping. there was a little bit of coping. Everybody's going to cope a little bit in some way. They're going to find a vice eventually.
Yeah.
Like, as long as you possibly can, go without. And I think, too, it was just more of like, I refused to let it define me long term. I refused to let it be something that I didn't heal from. Because I just wanted to live life and, like, be the best that I could be later on in life. Like,
Yeah.
And I knew that if I spent a lot of time, like, avoiding the pain and coping, then I wouldn't be the best version of myself later.
Yeah.
And I just kind of knew that. So I was like... Yeah.
In AA, I think it's AA, but with addicts, they talk about the addiction and the pain and the struggle, and you you make your amends and you do all the steps, because they say that you can't go around the problem to solve it. You have to go through it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, and that's just in life in general. Like, I mean, shoot, freaking, you can't grow in the gym without a lot of pain, without feeling the pain.
Yeah.
I mean, it's anything.
Yeah, dude, 100%. It seems so simple, but if you're kind of on autopilot, you need to look around and be like, what can I do that's going to hurt some?
Well, and I think we've talked about it before. I actually remember a conversation with you one time where, like, I remember we were talking about something, and I think it was in context of I think it was your context of, like, your therapist talking about how your wife is, like, questioning things that most people don't until they're, like, in their 50s.
Yeah.
And I remember responding with something along the lines of, like, or at least having the thought, I don't know if I responded with it, but something to the effect of, well, most people, like, if they do that, if they chase the pain or if they, like, question things, then eventually they question themselves. And most people are just so comfortable that doing any of that, like, completely shakes them and makes them have to question themselves at some points, and that's just uncomfortable, and most people just don't want that. So that's why it's so hard.
Yeah, and that's where the why is good, in my opinion. It's silly, but the addiction that I had with social media, I was looking into myself and asking, why am I going for my phone? Obvious answer, there's an addiction. But why is it there? Right. What is it feeding? There's a biological and neurological effect with the dopamine hit, and then now there's, like, this positive reinforced, like, addiction loop that comes with it. But consciously, like, what is it? Like, I feel insecure. What is it about?
Right.
And having those curiosities with yourself, it's like, just ask yourself why sometimes. The why, I really think that the why can fuck you, especially if you're a thinker, because it's like, it can be a nonstop loop.
Right.
But if you don't ever ask yourself why, you should. Now I'm talking myself into liking why again. God damn it, Thomas Neal.
You're welcome.
But if you're on autopilot, I don't know who you are in the internet world, but if you feel like you're on autopilot, you want something to change in your life. You want to be a fun-loving, righteous, joining a motorcycle gang club kind of guy. Or if you want to be a dirty hippie with a fucking jerry-rigged podcast, you have to start asking yourself, why am I not doing those things? Huh? Why am I fat? Well, I like donuts. I eat donuts instead of going to the gym. Well, why is that? Well, because it's comfortable to do it. Why is it comfortable? Yeah. And uncover that stuff.
Why don't you want to be uncomfortable? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I was just going to throw this out there. I'm not going to ask you because I believe this to be true and I hear it often enough from professionals. But to get to the why is scary. So before the why, I think you should train yourself to be curious. Like, especially if your bad tendencies. Like, that's very interesting. I can't talk. That's very interesting that I would drink whiskey for the 15th day in a row. That's very interesting. That's curiosity. And then you can go, all right, buffer. Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the curiosity or that mindset in particular? Are there any mindset games you play with yourself to improve? That's a better way to ask what I'm saying.
I don't know about that, but I think thinking about the way that people approach things, like, you just have to be willing to be uncomfortable, and, like, you might be wrong. And, like, especially in today's world, nobody wants to be wrong. I feel like maybe that's not even just especially. I think it's seen more in today's world because everything's out in front. But,
yeah.
If you're unwilling to be wrong about something, then you're just not going to grow. Like, I know... And it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, really. Like, most people, I feel like, live at that point where they're up on the freaking top of the thing, and they're like, oh, I think I know everything about it. And they don't really ever progress to the point where they're like, oh, actually, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I've been there, I've been down here, and I've been back here where I just hadn't even started on something. You know, I've been all over it, and it's just the willingness to like set your pride aside and be like, hey, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
And what if everything I've ever thought was wrong?
That's
Maybe
scary.
it is scary because then your identity's screwed because like at a certain point you get to the point where you're like, oh, like I've been this wrong about this many things. Wow, am I a fraud? Like have I grown up in like the wrong like it gets really scary, but I think it's the best thing for you. Like I think some of the best thing one of the best things that's happened to me is the fact that I chose to sit down and deconstruct myself, my faith, my life, my whys, my all of it.
So, with identity, and I identify, like from a spiritual standpoint, I used to identify as atheist for a long time. I still don't disagree with a lot of the logic that allowed me to become an atheist, but I am also not afraid to like dive into spirituality. I'm not afraid to say that there is some kind of force that's acting around us, and I'm also not afraid to say it's fucking weird that we exist. It's really weird that I can't prove that you're actually sitting there right now, right? You know, all I know, what is the, I think, therefore I am, right? So, in the context of you questioning everything, how do you apply that to a Christian theology?
For me, it was more of like, so I got to a point, Levi the Poet has a quote, and I kind of gravitated to this one for a long time. He says, it's not that I don't believe, it's just that sometimes faith feels more like cataracts than clarity. And in my life, because like I said, I've spent a lot of time in ministry, I've spent a lot of time in missions. I was even in the middle of the Ferguson protests doing a 21-day prayer and worship tent. I've seen things to the point where I'm like, okay, I could never not believe.
Yeah.
In the context of things, when I was going through the divorce, I sort of was like, okay, well, I've seen God provide for me in ways that just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I know he cares for me, but I had to question, okay, but does he actually love me if the Bible says that he does?
Yeah.
So I had to like go through that and like, okay, but because I'm going through this crap, like I feel like nobody loves me, and I feel like I was like, hell, I don't even love myself right now.
Yeah.
At the time, I was like, I feel like I'm just a POS and like I'm not a great person. So, I think experience mattered a lot in that. And then, it's just, I deconstructed it, like, a lot of things in the church that used to make sense to me don't make sense anymore. Like, this will get really weird. I'll try to make it fast so I don't spend a lot of time on it. But, like, the ideas that a lot of churches spend a lot of time on are actually, like, Old Testament stuff. And if you look at it through the lens of Christianity, then the Old Testament is an old covenant. A covenant is essentially just a contract that's legally binding by death.
Yeah.
So Jesus says, I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Okay, if he fulfilled the law is the contract. The contract's fulfilled. No, contracts after they're fulfilled, no longer, the terms of said things are no longer applicable. Same thing, the contract was between Israel as a nation or a people group and God. Well, if God died, then that also would null and void the obligation of whatever, so one party died. Either way, a lot of what the church does now, they spend a lot of time in like old covenant things such as tithe, or Constantine rebuilt the temple and took the church from being a house church thing that you see in the book of Acts to what we see today, especially with Catholicism.
Yeah.
And sort of reinvented the wheel, sort of took back a lot of the old concepts. And so, like, I spent a lot of time, like, digging through that stuff. The fact that like I said, I'd seen so many different things, and the fact that most people in church context, they've never seen anything like that. So, like, when I walk into a church and I feel like it's like almost, hey, we're feeding you guys little candies, like we're going to keep you happy to keep you in the seats, but really they've never experienced anything, then I have to like, I questioned a lot of those things, and like, how do I not come at these people like a prophet in the Old Testament and be like, woe is you, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Like I spent a lot of time in a lot of those things, so yeah.
Constantine is interesting. Constantine kind of like converted, like you're saying, the old way to the new way, and the old way in a lot of ways was pagan too, and these religions coexist And,
Well, that's in Europe, though.
Okay.
That's in Europe. So Constantine took what was happening in Europe and sort of reformed it into what Catholicism became, which also became a governmental entity and everything else. But what I'm talking about as far as the Church of Acts was, it was more of like people actually... There was legitimate community there.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't like leadership the way that there is today. There was leadership, but it was different. It wasn't like somebody sitting there talking to everybody else and everybody else just listening. It was a legit community. People were living together, and there was more context for faith. There was more context for...
Yeah,
So.
for sure. I would imagine you're not opposed to like other beliefs and religions, right?
I study a lot of that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I've looked into a lot of things, but you know, I've also looked into the fact that like ancient Chinese like characters basically tell the story of Genesis when you look into them.
Yeah.
Things like that, which is the oldest like living.
That's crazy.
Or like still. Wow, words. It basically dates back to what would be around the Tower of Babel time frame.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
providing the church, the Bible's true and accurate in any way, then that's about the time frame that those things would happen. And
Yeah. Something definitely happened at some point in time that was strong enough that it got passed down from campfire to campfire for God knows how long. No pun intended. There is a psychologist, a child psychologist, that he's got these 5 steps of consciousness as you develop into being a conscious sentient member. You have a level of sentience that is beyond being a child. Like you like first become aware of yourself and all this. But one of the stages is I wish I could remember the name, but it's when kids are on a playground and they're playing games, and then the rules of the game come after the game has started to play.
right.
Right? The rules are already baked into the consciousness of the group of children.
Yeah.
And Dr. Jordan Peterson has a Bible lecture. He's a devout person, and he's a person of faith, but he breaks down the context of the Bible as like we are trying to decode the rules that have already existed amongst us. And when I heard that, I was like, I'm only going to say atheist to people that I know it'll bother. Because if someone's not willing to like question themselves for a second, which you're not, obviously, because I haven't come at you and been like, oh, yeah, that's how I believe, because it's so convoluted and complex.
I
you know that.
understand. Yeah, absolutely. Like nothing's binary, really. And I understand like where a lot of that come from, but like I don't know. Like a lot of Christians wouldn't even look into like the Book of Enoch because they're like, that's not Bible, but it's quoted in the Bible. Like there's a lot of things that I challenge as far as the church goes that I'm just like, I'll step on toes, but that's also, I'm an Enneagram 8, which is the challenger. I challenge all the things all the time.
Yeah, I kind of respect you for that. I'm too afraid to like make family functions weird. So, which is, I guess, if you've seen my stuff on Instagram or whatever, sometimes you're probably like, oh, really? But there are things that I don't want to say online because I don't want to say them to my family.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're the challenger.
Yeah.
Because of the Enneagram.
Well, not because of the Enneagram, but that's just the Enneagram type that I am. But I've always challenged everything. Like, and that's one reason. I guess we'll full circle a little bit, but back to the why thing. Like going through my childhood things, I think the reason that my parents butted heads so much is because I am that type of person, and I would like challenge them on stuff, and they would always give me the typical. Because I said, and that was not good enough for me.
Same here.
And I understand now why that's not good enough for anybody, really, and that's actually like just it's sort of a cop-out way to parent it, but
it's a lazy way of
regardless.
parenting, I think, in my opinion.
And you build more. I get it. I understand where they're coming from. I understand where they were in that point of life, like mentally and emotionally. I understand like why they would be that way. I understand the point where it's like, hey, I'm exhausted. You're challenging me. I don't want to hear it right now. I get all that. But like as I've sort of delved into some of this, I realize now that it's like, okay, if I'm willing to explain to the child the why behind why I said something, then they're gonna feel respected enough that like, hey, I respect you enough to like explain these things to you so that you're like caught up to like so that you're at my level a little bit more. But then also they're gonna respect you more because you actually took the time to do that and not just get lazy and whatever. But anyway.
Yeah, there have been times where I've said to Malachi and Olivia, I'm just like, you just blah, because I don't even say words, and it is because I'm tired.
And there's times that it's appropriate.
Yeah.
But if you do it all the time.
For sure. Yeah. Or like, there's been times where they need to be quiet in the moment because there's a serious thing happening, and I'm like, yeah. But I definitely resonate really hard, and don't know if it was nature or nurture that led me to questioning everything as well and being like a bit of a provocateur. I would imagine me being a provocateur came from me wanting to challenge and then getting so much pushback from it. So I just I think I probably projected my hatred from my parents, not asking or not answering my questions onto everyone else. See, who needs therapy? Thanks.
Got you, bro.
No, but you're saying in a break, so not on here, you were saying that you thought that I was a peacekeeper.
Well, I said that like we had talked about it, and maybe you are.
Yeah.
Which would make sense if you're like a little bit uneasy about conflict. That doesn't mean that you won't do conflict. My brother's a 9 with a wing of 8. He's uncomfortable with conflict, but he'll do it.
Yeah.
And he's willing to like be like, well, maybe that's wrong, like whatever. But like his natural tendency is to like try to like he's like that. Well, like you said, he understands where everybody's coming from. And I think I spent a lot of time like Enneagram gets real complicated, but like I spent a lot of time I think as a child with more of a 9 wing, and I like eventually developed more of a 7 wing, which is more the enthusiast, want to do all the things all the time, and a little bit more like exuberant the way that I am.
Yeah.
But because I was like sort of pushed down, I feel like emotionally, I spent a lot of time like understanding where everybody was coming from a lot of times.
So with the Enneagram, you can change throughout life.
So your core type never changes.
Okay.
Your wing can change, but you only have like one side or the other. But the wing is more about nuances to your type rather than anything.
Yeah.
Then you've got subtypes. You've got self-preservation subtype, a social subtype, and what they call the sexual subtype, which I prefer the term one-to-one because it's more of like. So you've got subtypes as well. You have a dominant, a secondary, and a blind spot. So my dominant is sexual, my secondary would be social, and then my blind spot is self-preservation, which is true because I just am not a very self-preservating kind of guy.
You're a martyr, right?
I'll just jump out of the freaking boat, and I don't know if I can swim or not, but I'm going for it.
Yeah.
So then you got those, but then you dive even deeper. We all experience things through the head, heart, and gut, but your primary type is either in the gut triad, the heart triad, or the head triad. When you get into those, you experience those things through those first, but then you get into your tri-type, because you experience things through the other things as well, it gets complicated.
Yeah. So the core Enneagram types, those don't
Core
change.
motivation, it doesn't change for you.
So is that something that they think
You can
is
develop in it though. So like an
Okay.
8 that's super unhealthy, and like we may still challenge everything, but like when it doesn't work for us anymore, we'll withdraw to the 5 is what they call it. And the 5 is more an observer, usually less enthusiastic or in a room, or like we tend to withdraw a lot. So like we move to the 5 is what they say. But then in health, we move closer to the 2, where we're more like the 2 is helper.
Yeah.
So like we're more champions of people.
Okay.
And when we come into health and we're like in a good spot, then we're more likely to push people to be better and things like that, rather than like withdrawing from everybody and just shutting off.
Okay, so the Enneagram test doesn't, what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is like the nature versus nurture. The Enneagram doesn't say that you were born a particular type necessarily. It could be developed at some point. They don't.
More so. They
No
theorize,
answers to that question. Damn it.
They theorize that you probably take on the triad type of one of your parents, probably. Maybe not always, but then as you progress through your first few years of life, you probably take on certain traits that lock you into like a type within that triad, is what they think.
Yeah, I can see that. I was listening to these neurologists on the Rich Roll podcast, and their kids are like in college, and they're 14 and 15, and the dad was saying that from the very beginning, their 2 kids, one of them was like head first would like go into the ocean, and the other one was like afraid of the water.
Right.
But he also thought that was like something like one off, like the mom had to react a particular way,
right?
And then the one kid saw that and benefited from it, and the other kid had the mom react a different way to the ocean. So tracing back the whys, very important. You keep coming back to the why. Figuring out all that stuff. But then what happens when you uncover everything? Can you uncover everything? I don't know.
Well, so like especially within the context of the Enneagram, it's more of like I was listening to one podcast about it recently where they talked about like it's 9 different ways that people move through the world and 9 different ways to become a healthier person. And at some point, because the type is more of just like your habits, like and your motivations, but
Yeah.
when you sort of like become more, the more and more healthy you get, and I don't think you can get completely to the point where you're like sort of adapted to every facet of human potentiality, but like you become more, the more you rounded you become, the less locked into your grooves it is. It's because it's more of like, okay, I have these patterns, and then as you start to like smooth out those patterns to where you're like being a better person, then like then I can go back and I can look at like my disintegration into 5. Now I can use that as a tool rather than a coping mechanism, and then you just adapt and you become whatever. And so it's, yeah.
It's constant. I would imagine your mental health, this analogy plays out, but it's like having a car and changing the oil. You don't have to change the oil, but the car will blow up eventually.
Yep.
And it's going to blow up anyway, but it'll last a lot longer if you change the oil. So always like tuning up and like touching base.
Yep.
So maybe I'll take one of those tests. Whenever people have said, what Enneagram type are you or what personality type are you, my go-to response was always the type that doesn't take fucking test.
Well, and I didn't actually take a test either at first. I just looked at the types and I just knew, because, and sometimes it's that simple. Like if you're like, and sometimes it's about how self-aware you are, but again, it's more about motivation. So like 2s and 9s look a lot alike sometimes because they're both self-forgetting, but it's why are they self-forgetting? You start diving into that, you can figure out which one they are more likely to be. Also, like, what do you do when you're like in a stressed situation? Do you move more towards one like type, or do you move towards one other type more? And then
Yeah. Is there anything that you're practicing currently in stress situations? Is there something that you're trying to like change your default to?
less so trying at this point, more so like succeeding in, I think. So back to, I'll state this as like my type of Enneagram. Like we tend to, our first emotional response is usually anger. And I used to like internalize anger towards myself a lot in like any situation that was inconvenient. So like if I got a flat tire, or if I broke down in Arizona, or if I broke a chain recently in South Carolina, or if I biffed it and wrecked my motorcycle yesterday. A few years ago, I would have been like immediate like frustration, anger, and whatever. I'm not entirely sure when it started to change. I will say that like I think a little bit of it is like watching guys like Brady and how they like live life, and how it's just like life's going to happen and it's fine. It's between like watching inspiring people like that, but also like wanting to just be a better person, and also like just getting to a point where I'm like, the worst things that happen don't matter as much as I think they do most of the time. I've gotten to a point where like when I sat waiting for a tow truck for 5 hours in South Carolina because inconvenience after inconvenience after inconvenience, flat tire on the tow trailer, whatever, etc. It's like I could have sat there and gotten super stressed and frustrated, and I would have. But anymore, I'm just like, roll with the punches. It's part of the adventure. It's part of the story. It's whatever. It's not worth getting angry about. So, and if I got angry, I would just be more stressed, and then I'd just be like in a bad mood. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been working on, and like, thankfully, I've been pretty decent at like succeeding at it. Is like getting to a point where I just like the inconveniences and the stressors don't bother me as much because I'm just like.
Is there a trigger, like when you get in a situation where you would normally default to anger? Is there something you say to yourself? Not now, if you're in the practice of it. Like I don't have to tell myself to run. I just know tomorrow I'm going to run. But
I think it was more just a recognizing that like the inconveniences don't matter. And again, because I've had so many things just work out fine, I'm like, nah, it's just going to work out.
Yeah.
Like, and it will. It never the way I expect. Never the way I expect.
Yeah.
But it always works out.
Yeah.
And the more I've recognized that in life, the more I've been like, oh, that's like, it's going to be fine. It's going to suck for a little bit, but it's fine.
Yeah. Everything's fine
Might
until
hurt
it's
my
not
wallet a
at
little
one
bit,
time,
but
right? Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's the going through it versus going around it, right?
And being good to people helps a lot too. Like when you're good to people, they're good to you. Like in the story in Arizona, like because I just choose to be as good of a person as I can be, and like because I'm like just living life and whatever. Like there was somebody that like could have charged me $500 for something, ended up going, Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. When you expose yourself, when I lived on the road for a long time, I used to always say that I thought I was like running into the best people, like always, because when someone's like in a place where they want to be charitable and they want to help, they're usually not having a bad day.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable to know that there are people out there that are like that, and the more vulnerable you make yourself, I think the better of humanity you can see. But you can also translate that into like what you're saying, and like being a good person. And it's like if you're having a shitty day, why would you impose that on somebody else?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, being a good person, and then also like living life, man. Like when you're living life, it inspires other people, and they like especially people that want to live life, but they just haven't figured out how yet. They're like freaking moths to a light. They're like, dude, like you're living life. This is cool.
Yeah.
And you know, and then it's like, okay, now you got people around you. If you ever have something go wrong, at the very least, you got people to ask a question to. And at the very best, they're just going to freaking want to help you because, like, you're good to them.
Yeah.
And if you're good to them, and people crave community. And so, like, when they feel like they're a part of what you're doing or, like, and you're treating them well, then they feel like they're a part of it and they want to, you know, so I don't know.
Yeah, treating people well does go a long way. Setting the example too, for me, like, because I would default to anger a lot. It's like what I was taught, I think, growing up, and
Yep.
there was a flip flop with me, parenting specifically. Malachi used to freak out and like stabbed a pencil into the wall, like ripped up Pokemon cards, like I'd have complete meltdowns, and I used to get frustrated about it. And then one day I put in I would call this like a Christian kind of like practice. I sat down with him and I fairly calmly told him I loved him. I'm like, it's okay that you're mad. It's okay that you've been saying these crazy things to me. I know that you're going through a lot, and I love you. And it was hard work to be calm. I felt all of those emotions come up. You feel the feelings, like you're saying. Like you can't ignore them. Right. You own them. You just choose to not react to them. And since then, he's not had a freak out. And I raise my voice like once every 6 months or something. But I've stopped freaking out too.
Yeah.
And those feelings, maybe you can attest to this, they don't go away. You just learn to react to them differently, and then the outcome is always so much better.
Well, I was listening to somebody recently talk about the programming of the brain as you're a child, and like he was talking about how like you have these responses in your brain based off of what you were programmed as a kid to like respond as, and the way you change them is by like recognizing them at first, and then sort of being like, no, I'm not gonna have that response. Then when your brain's like, oh. After a while, your brain's like, oh, there's actually going to be a negative response to how I'm responding to the situation, so I'm not going to respond to it the same way, or at least as much. So, like, yeah, you're still going to feel emotions, but, like, just not letting them control you is the key. Like, and even when they do, like, recognizing it and then being like, not shaming yourself, but being like, okay, that's not kosher. I need to change this. And eventually, like, your brain's just going to start reacting a little bit differently because you're telling yourself that's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, good. So have you changed your self-talk, or has your self-talk improved after you've stopped reacting?
I mean, I remember like even just a couple of years ago, if I would forget something when I was going to work, I would immediately just be like, you always do this, you stupid idiot, you know?
Yeah.
I would immediately just like implode and like go super angry on myself. Or like the one time that I walked out the door. Okay, so I had a wreck in a car, and it broke the latch for the hood, so I had like zip tied it. The zip tie had held for a little bit, and I was like, okay, well, I literally walked out the car to the car one morning going to work, and I was like, I need to check that and change that. I just need to, but I was like, it'll be fine. I just need to get to work. Literally a couple miles from work, it blew out my windshield, and I was livid.
Oh, man.
Immediately livid. And I was just like, I'm stupid. I knew it. I shouldn't have freaking done it. I should have just freaking done it when I immediately like imploded. And it got to a point where I was just like, that's not healthy. And I would do that. And I'm like, that's not good. Like, I just need to stop being so aggressive towards myself. Because at the end of the day, like, yeah, I could want to not be so absent-minded or like as quick or like whatever. Like, sometimes I'd like to be a little bit more on the ball. But, like, I also get that I'm just not that way. It's not my strong suit to be on the ball all the time. And what my strong suit is going with the flow. And so, yeah, when the crap happens because I dropped the ball at least I'm good at going with the flow. So like lean into that and not lean against, so hard. Now there's things I should improve upon, yeah, but I'm not gonna like beat myself up over them anymore. So yeah, my self-talk has helped improve that way.
Yeah, you're probably gonna need a lot of that. I imagine living out of a van on the road. I lived in a bus for a little while.
Actually, I think
And that broke down a lot.
simplifying my life a little bit though.
Good.
That's gonna help.
Good.
Because it's more of the fact that I'm doing too much. I was doing too much all the time, and I was constantly like high stress.
Yeah.
Doing less and being like, okay, it's
Yeah.
helped a lot.
Yeah. And it's nice too if you have a problem and like you're stuck somewhere in your home because you're home everywhere, right?
Well, that too, like, also you mentioned like breaking down. Like the fact that I've worked a job now that it's like I can assess just about any problem at this point. Like I may not know how to fix everything, but I know how to find out how to fix most
Mechanically, right?
things. Yeah. Because I work in mechanical, like in a fabrication job. I work with machines and stuff, and it's like at this point in my life, I'm like, I can figure out just about anything. But even if the van breaks down and it's like I'm not going to be able to afford or be able to fix it, well, as long as I can get it towed to a place that I can leave it for a while, I can live out of it and then just freaking travel on my motorcycle. I got a motorcycle, it's fine. Whatever.
Yeah.
I'll live off a motorcycle for a while if I have to.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like,
I
I've
love
just
it.
gotten to that point where I'm like, I don't care what happens as long as it'll be fine.
I'm so stoked for you, man.
Thanks, dude.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
Want to wrap up, but I want to.
Yeah, we talked a while.
No, we didn't talk that long. Not as long as I'd like. So we have to do this again.
I could keep going, yeah.
Touch base on a lot of mindset. I love that. Let's leave with you've been in the van for a while now. You've been building it out, right? Someone that's listening, what would you say to them if they're getting ready to do a van build? What's some things you wished you would have known at the beginning of the van build that you know now? Is this a loaded question?
No, I don't. I just don't know. Like, I just really, I make like eyeliner and wing it. That's all I do.
Yeah.
I literally was just like, I'm gonna figure it out. I freaking put in, cabinets before I had the bed in, and then I realized, oh, this doesn't work, and then I had to move the cabinets. Like, it's just like, I don't know. I mean, you just gotta freaking do it and figure it out. Like, that's really what it comes down to. If you don't have the skills, like, YouTube's a good resource, or like, if you've got the money, go pay somebody to do it. But I haven't been on the road, like, and actually living out of it on the road. I've been at work, so I could, like, use the kitchen and at work and stuff. So I haven't had to, like, fully experience everything yet. So I don't know enough to be like, okay, I wish I'd have done this.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, so just do it, though. That's basically, yeah.
Just freaking get after it. Like, what's the worst that happens?
Yeah.
As long as you're still alive, it's fine.
I love this spirit, man.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, man.
And I look for, we're going to have to do this again and hear some tales. And I hope you document enough that we can just, like, do one of these and have, like, a ton of, like, footage from your adventures.
That's the plan. I do intend on documenting a lot more than I have been.
Yeah, go fast, don't die, all that.
Absolutely. Dude, clock's ticking, start living.
Hell yeah, dude.
All right, bro. Appreciate it.